Hi, and welcome to On the Couch, Conversations with Brenda Porter. Today's guest is the wonderful Cherie Caldwell. Now, Cherie is a human resources thought leader with over 2 decades experience working with Fortune 100 corporations and startups. She has partnered with various businesses, helping them shift their paradigms, reimagining their institutions, and she's an expert that offers nuanced solutions. She launched her own company, rebranded and launched her own company this year, the Cherie Caldwell Company.
Right.
And she's a wonderful person that gives back to the community by serving on boards. She's a member of the board of Cool Girls. She's the chair of the Susie Bass Award board, and she's an advisory board for the Children's Museum of Atlanta. Welcome, Cherie.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. I was real excited to hear how you're doing these conversations. I think it's just much needed,
Well,
right now for people to have deep conversations.
I think that's important too, and I think that this sort of came out of a need or a statement that there were not many African Americans outside of actors in the business or related
Right.
to the business that some organizations were aware of. And I was like, well, we need to let people know that there's people of color that are in all areas of theater, not
Right.
just on the
Right.
stage, but behind stage, in
Right.
administration, on boards, getting things together, real estate, selling us businesses and spaces. So that's how it started. And
Good.
I have had a few of them and have been educated myself, and I've enjoyed quite a few.
Right. That's good.
Now, I really,
So it's good to know.
yeah, sorry. What were you
No, I
going
was
to
going
say?
to say, I think it's good that you're bringing awareness to the fact that there are people of color everywhere. And I think we could argue that there's room for more, right? There's room for more work. But I like the idea of people knowing that some ground has been covered, that there's access to people they can have that can maybe show them the ropes and help them pursue the path and understand the path they took, the path that's been laid forward for other people to follow on. So I think that's outstanding. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And speaking of which, I am honored as you are to be on the board of the Susie Bass Awards,
Right.
which I think is a wonderful organization. Will you tell the people a little bit about the Susie Bass Awards, what it is, what it does?
Right. Well, there was an actress named Susie, and with her passing, there were people who wanted to recognize all that was good in theater and honor her by labeling that award for her. And I think that she had been a person who worked for the community, not just for herself. She had been on stage and in film, but she was like the cheerleader, I think, for the actor community, from what I heard. I never had the pleasure of meeting her, but her legacy lives on. And this came out of that. And I thought, we always compare it to like the Tonys, because everybody knows about the Tonys. But the Susies is for Atlanta. And it's our opportunity to recognize and celebrate, Atlanta professional theater and recognize the excellence of the theater that's in the Atlanta community. And Atlanta theater is big. I mean, I think there's a lot going on, not right this moment because of the pandemic, but Atlanta theater is outstanding. And, we wanted to recognize all the talent that goes into being a part of that. And I think that's why the Susie is important. And I think they can play a great role in helping lure people back to the theater when the time is right.
Well, I think you're right. Atlanta theater is big. When I first moved here in the early 80s, there were like maybe 4 or 5 theater companies. And that has grown expeditiously as we have a huge number of theaters, companies, and of all sizes and all genres. And it's really wonderful to be a part of that community and to be a part of an organization that celebrates the excellence.
Right.
Now, you have been on boards and worked with companies before. And I think Cool Girls, I know, and the museum are nonprofit organizations.
Right,
How does
right.
a nonprofit, being a board member of a nonprofit organization, differ from that of being on a for-profit?
Well, first of all, when you're on a nonprofit board, you're really there to be a working member in some capacity, whether it's helping fundraise, donating funds, donating time, donating services. You're really there to kind of help hold it together. You are there to give advice and govern with the executive director and any, if there are any employees. You may, for a nonprofit, you can run around and do errands or print things and just depending on how small the organization is and what their resources are like, their funding is like, you can do a lot of hands-on work. For-profit boards is a whole different thing. There's a little bit of liability there. For successful companies, they sometimes pay their board members. They also have some legal obligation to the company with the Sarbanes-Oxley and those other laws that have come into effect since then. So there's no more hands-off. So they have a duty to be kind of a checks and balance. They're there to guide the CEO leadership team. They have particular committees like the compensation committee and things like that that are that look into executive compensation and look into other things along those lines. They may have some accountability to the stockholders, but they're definitely probably a part of the stockholder meetings. It's a different thing. With nonprofits, you're giving of yourself. With the for-profits, it's a little bit more of a fiduciary responsibility. It's a job in some ways. Again, a lot depends on the size of the organization and the resources that they have available. But nonprofits, I'd say, are really about how can you give to them and help support them and really champion their mission. And I think that to me it's a little bit tougher, right? Because this is your extra thing, because you probably have your own job, you probably have your own family responsibilities, whatever that might look like, because families are very different. And then you're doing this because you have the commitment and you like the passion around the nonprofit ideas and what they're about and what their mission is. So it's your passion combining with their passion and trying to bring something beautiful forward, right? And I think that nonprofits are rewarding in that way.
Knowing that what you've just said, and I know with my life and such, my family's, my work, that I feel it's a real honor to be on the Susie boards, but I cannot figure out how I would have time to be on 2 other or 3 other boards. I don't know how you do it. It's just like, it's amazing.
Well, the Cool Girls is the Children's Museum. I was on the board and then I rolled to the advisory board. The advisory board has far fewer responsibilities.
Okay.
And that's just wonderful. I sometimes get a phone call and ask for my opinion about something that's in my sweet spot. And then they ask you to participate in like 2 calls a year and just to brainstorm and throw some ideas. So I do that as a labor of love because I love the Children's Museum. I had been a part of it, the board for a while, like 6 years or so, way back when, and I just never wanted to give up my attachment, but I did need to let go of some of the time commitment there. So, but it's been very rewarding.
Yeah, I love the Children's Museum. I'm upset that I can't go in as an adult. I understand why, but it just makes me upset because I went in as an actor one time and I was like, oh, I had fun. I want to come
Yes,
back. And they're like, no, you can't. I'm like,
that's that's
oh.
great. Well, what I
So,
would tell you about Cool Girls and Susie's, where I find some interesting intersection, is this whole conversation around diversity. Because Cool Girls is about promoting young women of color and helping them be successful and guiding them along the way and providing programs to help empower them, help them gain some financial skills, help them understand their health, their body, their rights, and how to respect themselves. And we're also looking to see what is it we can add around advocacy for themselves and looking at from the civil rights lens and the social justice lens, how do we help empower them around that arena as well? And so that's one thing. And then with the Susies, we're looking at how do we promote diversity? How do we help bring awareness to different types of theater and genres that people might not otherwise experience? How do we support the diversity and people of color actors that are out there, including the LGBTQ community, you know? And so we're supporting excellence is about recognizing the broad spectrum of talent that there is, and that excellence shows up in many different ways and in many different formats. Excellence isn't only comedy or only drama. So it's not only one type of actor or another type of actor. Excellence shows up. And really, theater is just an expression of life in so many different ways that there's beauty in all of it. And how do we help ourselves recognize that? How do we look past our own unconscious bias or our thoughts about things to see the beauty in the art? And art is always one of those things, you know, that some things appeal to some people and some things don't appeal to some people. And you can still recognize the beauty in it, even if it's not your cup of tea. So, but that takes some intentional thinking.
And the question becomes, how do you reach out? Because if you have if I have a group of people that I, am normally with, that I find comfortability with, how do I reach outside of that? How do I reach outside of that comfort zone and bring other people into something that may not be their norm?
Right. Yeah, and so interesting, because I've had this conversation with lots of folks, and even on as a board member, helping encourage bringing diversity about the boards. And I know I challenged a couple of folks, and I said, if you always go where you've always been, you're going to always get the same people. And part of it is, how do you reach out across the divide and say, I want to meet someone new? How do you get yourself to go someplace new, meet someone new? How do you find out what the barriers are to people coming to you and remove those barriers, right? And so interesting enough, like at the Susies, one of the things is that we ask a lot of our judges, right, in terms of time commitment. And so it lends itself to people who have a lot of time, which sounds like retirees, which sounds like, people that part-time opportunities, because maybe they do other things, take care of a parent or children, and someone with a lot of free time may not be a student, or may not be a person who's just starting out in their career, or may not be a corporate executive, or they have a family that's kind of demanding. So the full-time commitment was a barrier to having diversity. So how do we look at that differently? And companies, and I'm in human resources, so I know the challenges. How do you look at things differently so that you look to see if you're unintentionally causing a barrier? And you can find other resources. Right now, especially, there's so much conversation. So I can't buy that you can't find someone to have a conversation with to lead you to a path. You may not find the person on the first path out, but you can find someone that's not like you. You can find someone that's not like you to ask a few questions. You can reach out. You can look for organizations and try to chime in with them. So I think there are a lot more resources. And right now, like me, there are other diversity professionals that are out there that are willing to help and support organizations. So you can find that help if you really are having a hard time overcoming your own barriers.
That's really interesting. That look at it, that take on it. But we are in a pandemic, so people aren't going out. People aren't, in a way that they were before. People are sheltering in. So how do I reach out and still find that diversity? I don't know if there's an answer, but
Right. Well, I think people have become very adept at trying to find new ways to do things. So, for example, there were a zillion online camps for me for kids, right? So just right there, I'm like, what am I gonna do with my kids for the summer? Because they can't go anywhere. Now, all of them weren't for us. They didn't all work. But in trying to solve for that problem, I found that there were resources available. So sometimes it's just, it becomes, we become innovative when we have challenging situations. We really do. And I'm not minimized, because there were a lot of people who, provided for everybody with
Mhm.
essential jobs. And there were a lot of places that could do a lot more remote, and so they were able to do that. But I think I also found, just like the camps popped up, there are little groups that popped up, people sponsored different things. I would say it's made it more challenging. I definitely agree with that. But in the midst of this pandemic, this whole conversation rose up too, in a way that it hasn't before. This has always been a conversation. There's always been a fight. There's always been a protest, but it is amplified right now. And I think because of that, there's been some interesting things. I got invited to a civil rights dinner, just out of the blue. So there are ways that people are making it available for people to get involved in these conversations and to do things. And I think it's a matter of being creative, and it's a matter of um, really wanting to. I think the other thing that I can say about this time period is that because we're sheltered in, it's also a really good time to reflect and a really good time to look, because even if you are having trouble connecting with people, you could take the time to read the books that are out there, the movies that have been suggested, to kind of examine yourself and look at where you are. And because we all have some unconscious bias, we
Yeah.
all have some, ways that we stereotype. It's how we group the world to so better understand and navigate it. But we can learn to leverage that as a guidance and not a truth about people, and be open to who people are, right? So I think what I find from this time is that there's been a really good time for self-reflection. I think, I know we did that at the Susie's. We had a really deep conversation about ourselves, and, about our, well, we've always advertised we're looking for judges, and or just like a church might say, the doors are always open. Okay, but are you going back? So you're only waiting for people to come to you. What are you doing to go to people? Right. And so I think we were like really able to have great conversation about what was important. What do we value? What do we believe in? And if we value it and we believe in it, but it's not showing up, then what more can we do to manifest that? So I was very proud to say that I think that our intentions, our vision, our attitudes were open, aligned, and inclusive, but our results weren't showing that,
Mhm.
and so let's just be honest about that. Let's just say we're not where we want to be, and so let's commit to doing better, and let's take a look at what will it take. And so you start looking at, what are the barriers? Well, time commitment. What are the barriers? Do people really know? What are the barriers? Okay, so let's start doing something about that. And I think we've put some energy into that, and we know that things won't change overnight. And right now, of course, with theaters being dark, it's harder for us to see those results, but we're pushing forward on lots of things, and we're trying to incorporate, well, and as you know, because you do our salons, looking at the training that we can do to help support people in having some exposure to the types of theater they might not have had, or being able to talk about unconscious bias when you're viewing a show, or look at how do you suspend um, personal preferences while you're looking at an artistic style that may not work for you. You may not be into musicals, but you might be looking at this one. You may not be into serious, deep drama, but here you are with this one. So how do you put the right lens on that? And I think one of the things I'm very proud of is that this is an organization who values diversity and inclusion and equity. There was just no doubt about that, but it was, how can we get better results in terms of our judging pool? How can we get better results in terms of our board, and maybe even other partners and stakeholders that we might need to have? And so I think we're putting some energy into that in the right way.
I think a lot of theaters are doing the same thing right now too.
Yes.
A lot of theaters are saying, how can we open up our minds and open up our doors? And as you said, not only open our doors, because a lot of theaters have open doors, but how
Right.
can we bring those people in? But how can we expand our thinking? Because it's one thing
Right.
to say, okay, we're inclusive. That's another
Right.
thing to be
Right.
inclusive, you know?
Right.
And so, and to make an effort to maintain that. And I think a lot of
Right.
theaters. And so based on that, I find myself excited about theater when it does come back, and
Right.
what that will mean to the Susies as we go through and view other performances, view new performances, and people's new seasons and what's going on. And so I'm excited about what what might happen. You know.
Right. I think it'll be really interesting because I think I agree with you. I think the creative types have probably been using this time and really, doing the kind of self-reflection that produces great results. So who knows what new works of art are going to show up? I think that it feels like there's been a little bit of an incubation, and what might that produce? And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that might turn itself around. And again, I think that theater reflects life and reflects us at ourselves sometimes. So I think it'll be really interesting. But it'll just be nice to get back out.
Yes, it will be. And I
Hmm.
know there's been a large push for funding organizations
Right.
to fund um, projects and organizations that are done by projects that are done by people of color and organizations that are run by people of color and blacks, BIPOC. And I think that that's going to make a big change in our art scene if
Right.
if that's followed through. And because there are a lot of smaller organizations who, if they just had that little bit of support, their good work could then become great work and could
Right.
really be in some way or more effective. So I'm looking forward to those changes.
Right. That would be kind of exciting.
Yes, I think so. Now you have your
Mhm.
own company. Tell me
Yes.
about your company.
So I used to call it Caldwell Consulting, and then I just decided to rebrand. I consulted with a coach for myself, and the work I'm doing is in this whole space. And so I'm trying to attack it from two different angles: coaching individual leaders. Primarily, I've been focusing on women of color, how to navigate in corporate America. So I call it taking the protest from the streets to the halls of corporate America, and coaching executive women, because if you look, you know across the landscape of Fortune 500, I think we're up to maybe 38 women now, but we're really short on people of color, and that's out of the Fortune 500. So, and that's probably even broader than that. So we're not really seeing much difference over the years. We've had some peaks and valleys, and now we're back. And so I want to empower these women to navigate, the things I learned the hard way. A lot of times I was the first. I was the first African American and woman, in some of the environments I came through. So I've navigated through some challenging times and some challenging situations, and always in tough businesses. I learned a lot. You know, I worked for a couple of very big companies, and I've learned a lot of things. So I feel like that experience is something I can pass on to raise up the women that come behind me. My other prong is to help organizations shape their culture so they can be more inclusive, and working with them. So I have a couple of proposals out now that I'm working with some organizations, kind of doing the how do you have the conversation with the leadership, and then how do you go through the organization and look at what that looks like and how to do that. And the truth is, we have these are not quick, easy fixes. I mean, our country is going through a lot right now, and the issues are tough. The conversations can be difficult. There's a lot of hurt all the way around. One of the things that I like to use to navigate through these times is a framework called Liberatory Consciousness. And Liberatory Consciousness was, uh, to my knowledge, produced by Dr. Barbara Love. And I want to say she's a professor in Massachusetts, but I can't call her school out right now. I don't remember off the top of my head. And the framework is really, driving awareness, then analysis, then actions, and then allyship. And the thing I've noticed is that as a people in America, we want to get straight to solutions. We want to kind of go bypass that uncomfortableness and let's just figure out what the answer should be. And the awareness is the part where that's needed. It's the deep conversations, the understanding of it. And we have to understand that the conversations are conversations. They're not competition. It's not about winners and losers, right or wrong. It's a dialogue to understand and share perspectives. It doesn't mean we have to get to agreement, but it is understanding. And another truth is, in this country, we founded the greatest democracy and we had slaves. Those two things are true. And they're at conflict of one another, because how do you write a Declaration of Independence for freedom and things along those lines, and then you have slaves? And, you know, I think it was several of the first presidents, I can't remember if it's 10 or 12, all had slaves, you know, and so there's a hard part for people to hear about these conversations. And none of us alive today were slaves or slave owners. However, the systems and structures in place have been perpetuated and we maintain them. So the conversations are going to be deep and difficult and challenging. And it's important to understand what the structures were that were built so they can be redone in a way that's equitable, right? So it's necessary to rebuild. It's necessary to understand. It's necessary if we say we want this country to be that which it professes to be for all of its people. And I think the working in the corporate side, because I think whether or the government, I think alleges you know, to be that place where we've established that, but they were one of the structures that were built first, right? But I think in corporations, they are sensitive to their stakeholders. And I think that the population mix means that more of us vote with our dollars and things along those lines. They're also sensitive to, you know, promoting the health of the planet, people, as well as profit. So if they're focused on all those things, I think you're going to find that there are companies that are sensitive to their stakeholders, to their consumers. And I find that those are places that, while it's still difficult to change, I think have an understanding of the link to its profitability and may have some more openness to what needs to happen. And I think that's one place for change. So I think corporate America is just as important place as the streets of America and as the hallways of government. And I think this is my personal opinion now, not a true statement, but I think it's got to be a full attack on all sides. And these are just three that I've mentioned. I mean, there's still more, right? I was looking at it through the nonprofit lens. We didn't even have the health conversation because I have no expertise in that area. So I can't even say anything there, but that side of things, right? And so there's so much here. And we're even talking about it in the theater world, you know, so it's very visible to people of color, but it's not always visible to others. And expressing our stories and being able to share so that we create the awareness, because really there's an obliviousness sometimes because there's no insight to our experience. We don't usually talk about it.
Somebody was asking or saying, you know, why are people rioting? Why are people burning? And I've always had that question, you know, in terms of why burn your own, why riot your own? But I understand that it comes out of the need to be heard, because once you say, you know, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, you know, you get louder. You begin to do things to say, I'm here. Listen to me. And if you're not listening to me, then I start to get angry because I think you're ignoring me. And if you're ignoring me, and then there's this whole thing that, you know, European Americans, which I choose to call European Americans, because if we're going to be African Americans, they need to be European Americans,
right?
In my opinion.
I'm with you.
So European Americans are saying, why are you angry and you're yelling at us and you're accusing us? And African Americans are saying, I'm not necessarily accusing you. I just want you to hear me, to understand and acknowledge, not to ignore my feelings or my struggle. And
right.
And when we have in the past, when I look at things like Black Wall Street or some of the all Black towns that were successful, things that do go, okay, we're going to make our own and then they get destroyed
Right.
by the majority population. Kind of go, we can't live in your world, and you won't let us live in ours. And
Right.
so it's we're in a interesting place in history. I think the pandemic, along with the racial injustice awareness,
Right.
it is the pandemic has allowed for it to settle, because years ago, something would happen, people would get upset, and be a weekend of people really upset. But then Monday came along, I had to go to work, I couldn't protest anymore. But now I don't have
Right.
to go to work because I don't have a job because the pandemic.
Right. Well, there's still a little bit of the, because I think obviously with the technology, there's a lot more awareness, because I think these things went on all the time, but now it's much more visible. There's much more awareness of it. When you think about the bird watching incident in Central Park, that happens all the time. And we're lucky it didn't escalate into a loss of life. The latest incident in Wisconsin, it's just, then the first question is, or the first statement is, well, he must have done something wrong. Well, let's see, bird watching, walking away from a conflict, smoking a cigarette, trying to sell a cigarette, maybe left a store. The point is, whatever it was, didn't deserve all that. It didn't deserve all that. The issue is excessive force. Um, And I think that we are missing the opportunities for that understanding, right? And we're missing the opportunity for what's the experience been like, because you just don't understand it. And it's about having those conversations to learn something. Because when I say both things are true, that there's white privilege, and then there's unconscious bias and microaggressions against people of color. Both those things are true. And it takes a minute to try to understand it and get the perspective, and it's being the benefit of the doubt. The difference between a bunch of armed white men storming a government building wanting to address the governor about her rules, how was that non-threatening?
Thank you.
Versus a guy walking away. Now, if they asked him to stop, maybe he should have considered that, because I think there's just a heightened tension that's already there, even if he was in the right and not in the wrong. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, let's pause. But that being said, he did not do anything that deserved all that. And I think the other issue is that then there's not a quickness to justice. And I think that we have to look at our history in order to really understand what needs to change, because we've built it on some untruths. We've built it on an untruth that people of color are inferior. That's just not true. That was something that was made up. We came here as colonists for the Europeans, as slaves for African or Black Americans, and then the indigenous people were just wiped out in lots of different ways. The land was taken from them. And so there's a lot of dynamics here that start the way the country started, and the way we got going, and the way we continue to build it. There was an intentionality around creating subservient people and a subservient class. And then when you build a country like that, you have to disconnect yourself from the trauma that you're inflicting on other people's. In a way, you have to deny it. So it really has been invisible to some people, because how did they take all that in? How did they take all that in? And, and I made an observation to somebody the other day. I was like, you know what? I read an article in Germany. There was a home that Hitler had lived in. I don't know if he was born there, if he had lived in it or whatever, for some period of his life. And they were very thoughtful and intentional about what to do with that place. They said, if we tear it down, we don't want people to come and stand in this corner and worship it, and because that's not what they're about. This is not a monument to that point in our history. And they actually, after they went around for some time, it ended up being a police station.
Oh.
So they normalized it, right? You know what I mean? And it's not a place where people are going to come and feel like, you know what I'm saying? That it's okay to
Wow.
bring Nazism to this place and to do something with that. So I found that interesting, you know, and yet we're over here arguing about statues and really the conversational writing. I know you and I, you raised it, we didn't touch on it. And I think the issue with the writing is you're saying that these things are more important than my life. You didn't question the protest until the rioting started. You didn't question what we're doing until you saw the looting. And let's be honest, it's not all the protesters that are doing that. You know, we've seen evidence that it's people, supremacists and other people getting involved in doing things to kind of keep it stirred up. I'm not saying that all the protesters are innocent, but I'm saying that all the violence isn't the protesters.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that it's true what you said. I think there are people that are peacefully protesting. There's people who have so much frustration and rage built up because they haven't been heard. It's like, what does it take? Because George Floyd wasn't the first, and he clearly wasn't the last, you know, and it keeps on going. And even in the turning point that George Floyd was, we still have more. Like, we're still having the conversation. Like, didn't that just stop people and make them say, wait, can we stop shooting unarmed Black people? But no, that just said, why can't we say all lives matter? Why are we saying this? Why are you destroying property? We really need to have some deep conversations.
Well, what I am
If that's the
finding,
focus, then we're missing something.
what I am finding is that, like, there's some organizations that I've worked with or working with, and they start the conversation, they have a little conversation, it gets a little uncomfortable, and they say, well, we need to do some other stuff, and we're going to come back to this, and that's it. They just start the conversation, and then unless you go through, it's like, you know, going through therapy. Once you get to the hard conversation, you got to get through it if you want to get well. And
Right.
there are a lot of places that aren't doing that. But that's why I appreciate the theater, because I think a lot of the artists are having hard conversations and now going, what action can I do?
Right.
A lot of the places, a lot of theaters and arts organizations put out statements. I know the Susies did, in support of the and the George Floyd and all of the injustice that was
Right.
happening. And I really appreciate, as an African American artist, I appreciate the way our arts organizations have come on board and been willing to be called out. I mean, lots of organizations have been called out and said, this is not working for people of color. This is not working for Blacks. And and without, because there's some places that have missions that are, you know, there's a the Aris, which does Celtic work. I don't expect them to necessarily have 90% African American people in their pieces, you know. But even they have reached out. Everybody has reached out and said, this world is wrong. We as the artists, what can we do? And I appreciate that. And
I think that's really good. And I guess that's another reason I like the liberatory consciousness framework, because it's not about shame or blame. Because I think when people get stuck into their guilt about the privilege that they've had, or they're guilty because now they have much more awareness, if we do the work right, it's not about shame and blame. We're all swimming in this water, and we've all maintained it, right? For somewhat, like the structures keep it there. So, you know, white supremacy and patriarchal society is not about the people, it's about the systems and the structures. But as people, we maintain those things. So bringing our awareness forward. And again, like I said, the conversations with not like looking for a winner or a loser, not a competition, a conversation to drive awareness, to get understanding. You know, Stephen Covey said a long time ago, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that, I think, is a very appropriate way to start. But we got to spend the time in that conversation and just acknowledge when it gets uncomfortable. I had an organization I'm with the board chair is a white female who was just so vulnerable. It's like, I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what to say, and I'd like to think that my intentions are good, and I probably have some awareness to have, and took it upon herself to go and educate herself and read White Fragility and just talk about the fact that she learned some things. Like, that's leadership. That's leadership that says, you know what, I don't know. It does make me uncomfortable. Let me go find out some things. Let me take a look at myself and see what I can do to make a difference, because this isn't okay with me. So let me make sure I'm not contributing to the problem and actually contributing to the solution. I could have been more proud to interact with that kind of a person. You know what I'm
And not
saying? That
everybody.
takes real courage. And to me, that's real leadership, real courageousness. And that's really being the heart of being the citizen of what this country is supposed to be about.
Well, I think that if you don't take that approach, then you're not really willing to look at yourself, and you're saying, oh, they're talking about other people. They're not talking
Right,
about me.
right,
And
right.
and you got to take at least a look at yourself to see if you are in that equation at all.
Well,
You
that's
know?
the whole reason they call it unconscious bias, because you don't even know. Right. And it afflicts all of us. It's not just people of color can have unconscious bias.
Right.
So all of us actually need to take a look at ourselves and see how we're contributing, to the state of things and what we could do differently. Yeah.
So as we come near to our end of our time, what would you like to, is there anything that you would like to make sure that people know about you, about boards, working on boards, working with the Susies, anything that you would want? We need to know.
Well, I think I would ask that people do the self-reflection, look for their unconscious bias. I would ask that people of color go insert themselves into places, that we haven't been. And I think in general, we've been good at that, right? We've been locked out of so many doors, but we found our ways into them. We're in the theaters, we're in the sports, we're in all kinds of places, that we might not have otherwise gotten on. And I think boards is another good place to go. I think in the nonprofit world, understand you're volunteering and it's asking something of you. However, the rewards can be making connections, building relationships that might lead to other things for you professionally and personally. So there is some upside to the fact that you're, in a giving role. Um, I do think that if you're worried about some organizations not being as diverse as they should be, go find out how you can help them with that. Even if you can't be the one to be a part of it, you can maybe help them find other resources or find places to reach out. And I think the last thing we can all do is have some uncomfortable conversations with all of our friends, our non-BIPOC friends as well as our BIPOC friends, and just create the space for us to all look at what we need to do differently, how we can help rebuild these structures in our country, and really kind of create the world we want to live in. And understand that this is not going to get fixed in a year. These are huge systemic changes, and it's got to keep going, right? We've got, I think we have more than a moment here. I feel like we have a movement here. And even if it moves from the streets, we have to move it into the hallways of our institutions and structures, our government, our health and medical care systems, our schools, our corporations, and really, really start to see some advocacy, some energy, and not silence our voices. I think that's the thing I would say. And I am all about doing this work. This is my passion. And how can I help, people move beyond that, whether from an individual standpoint or from an organizational standpoint? That's what I want to do. I want to be kind of the pond skipper that skips stones across many ponds and causes change and conversation to happen in all those places so that we can move forward. We have such potential to rise up to.
And how can people, if they want to contact you and employ you to help them do that, how can they contact you?
I do have a website for the Cherie Caldwell Company. I tried to shorten the acronym so they wouldn't have to write all that. So it's the CC Comp. So theccomp.com. So THECCCOMP.com. And that stands for the Cherie Caldwell Company. But yeah. So head
Well,
to my website
hopefully
and
some
fill out
people
my
will
contact
contact you,
form. I would love
and
that.
you'll get them working on their diversity, and we'll work on our diversity, and everybody in a good place. Thank you, Cherie, so
Very
much
good.
for having this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I
All right.
look
Take
forward
care.
to you too.
Sorry about
Bye-bye.
the phone.
Okay.
Stuff happens, I know.
I know.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to seeing your other conversations. This has been so much fun. So
Oh, good.
I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
All right.